Hello and welcome to our tutorial. So we're going to try and make a kind of troll-like kind of character, and we'll start by let's start by turning on some keys so you can see what I'm doing. And let's do that. And go into edit mode, Alt M. That's center. So that's going to be my center point. I can go G, move this, say, on X by 1 unit. I'm going to add a skin modifier, and then I'm going to extrude this up, forward a little bit, and then up again. So it's going to be sort of my leg, and move it in. I'm going to extrude into the center here, and I'm going to add a mirror modifier, and we'll turn on clipping. So I'm in the middle and I've extruded upward, and I'll just move that back a little bit, and then up and up, and then we'll extrude but turn off clipping for a minute and go G, bring this out and turn that back on. And this is going to be my arm, so it's going to be a big long troll arm, and we'll move it back a little bit, and then we'll extrude that forward and put it that way. And then we'll take our head here and we'll extrude, extrude that forward. Okay, and that's the basic shape of our troll. And we've got some geometry issues here, so we'll have a play with them. So Control A will get me to resize. Let's go to the wireframe here for a second. So Control A and Control A. Now what I want to do is I want to take this one here and say mark root. So that's now the root of my character. And yeah, it's not too bad. So we will, so Control A will scale things. Okay, and we will take this here, and not that one, and we're going to subdivide this, even though that's mid-arm. But that lets us inflate that a little bit, and that area, and likewise here, Alt A, Alt A. Okay, so far from perfect, but a basic kind of shape. So I'm going to apply my mirror modifier. Oh, I can't do that in edit mode, so I'm going to apply that. And that gives us a better shape here. Now we still have weirdness going on there, but we can fix all that. And we're going to sculpt this as well. So that's our basic sort of troll shape. Now we can create an armature, but we won't bother because we'll do that later. And I'm sure I could probably tweak this a bit more. But I'm going to apply this, and then I'm going to go to edit mode and try and fix the bits that don't work. So let's go back to wireframe and see what intersects what. So we'll take these two here, and we'll try and we'll put on this X mirror axis here, so when I go G, it moves on both sides, which is going to be very handy. So I have this vertex here, so I'm going to delete that, because that's just going to complicate matters. This here and this should merge, so I'm going to go Alt M at last. I can delete that guy and do the same here with this one, that one, and that one. So Alt M, merge at last. Let's do something similar here. Well, we can delete that. So I'm going to take that vertex there and go G two there. So we'll merge them. So Alt M at center, and I'm sure that's the same over there. Alt M at center. And then we have these verts here that we can put a face in. And then the same on this side. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's go back to solid mode and see what we've got. Okay, so that's definitely clean, or cleaner than it was. So we'll just slide back into wireframe and make sure we've no more internal geometry, and that's a good shape to start with. Okay, so so there's a number of ways to sculpt. Let's just save this first of all. So we'll go save as, and we'll call it Troll 1, and we'll save that. Okay, so yeah, so there's many ways to go about doing this. We'll probably put like a kind of a Lord of the Rings-esque kind of way, some sort of loincloth on him to hold his modesty. But we'll have a kind of a large bicep, forearm, kind of a big hand, not much of a neck, so where the head kind of just appears here, and basically like a big tree trunk of a character. We'll probably move these legs in a bit kind of closer to the center. So we'll go, GX. I actually quite like the fact that it's a little sort of rounded there. Okay, so let's sculpt. So file, save. Now there's a whole bunch of ways to sculpt. So if I go to sculpt mode, I can just immediately start to move stuff around, which we'll do a little bit of. I've got dynamic retopology, or I can add in a multi-resolution modifier. And all of these things work reasonably well, but I want to add more geometry to start with. So if I start sculpting and pushing and pulling, there isn't quite a lot, there isn't enough there to sort of to work with at the moment. So I'm just going to do a general sort of subdivide, so there's more geometry to work with, and that's going to make it a little bit easier. I'm also going to turn on proportional editing just for a little bit, and let's see if we can get a little bit going before we do any sculpting. So oops, that there. Maybe there. Can I get a loop off? No, I can get a loop there though, I think. And okay. And okay. Now we can see we've got a little breakage there, but that's good to see at this stage. So we'll turn off proportional editing and we'll go into wireframe mode. And so these two here are obviously should be together. So we'll go Alt M, merge at center. Oops, that one. Alt M. And that's gonna, with that in mind, revisit this guy. No, that guy. Yeah. So you can see there's two here as well. No, more than two. So Alt M, merge at center. And there's probably more. Yeah. So I'm gonna select everything. and then I'm going to go to mesh, clean up, merge by distance, and 2 were merged. Great. So it'll stop me from fumbling over them in the future. Okay, so we'll start at that, and we'll go into sculpt mode. And I'll start, like, so we've loads and loads of tools here. So we flatten and manipulate and all this. So this one here, the grab one's probably the easiest to work on at the start. So I'm going to go to solid mode and then matte caps and into this here. Okay, so we'll see if we can try and so F increases the sort of the area that you're manipulating. And okay. So again, we're just sort of trying to give this guy a little bit of volume before we start adding in more geometry. There's no point in having more geometry in the wrong place. So trying to round him out a little bit. He's a bit boxy. But then that's how we made him. So we can't complain too much. Okay, so okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on dynamic retopology, and this is going to triangulate the mesh, but it's also going to let me go in and do some sculpting. So I'm going to start on my clay strips tools. That's my weapon of choice, and let's do some kind of broad strokes to start with. And again, I still have my X mirror on, so whatever I do on one side will be duplicated to the other. So at this stage, all I really want to do is add in some geometry. So when you hold down, so when I left click here, I'll add in geometry, and I'm just sort of trying to follow maybe the shape that his ribs might follow. I can hold down the control key, and that will sort of invert the brush. And then holding down the shift key will give me smoothing. At this stage, like, these are just broad strokes. I want to be careful not to, it's quite easy to break your model, so to add in too much geometry in one place. Now, if you zoom out and draw, you will overwrite what you've got put underneath. So if you do make a mistake, it's easy enough to fix. So don't be afraid of making a bags of it at this stage. Also, you know, with all these things, save regularly to avoid disappointment. So I wouldn't zoom out too far. If I do that, I'll get weird results. So you know, the distance you are from the model in the viewport determines the resolution of each of these triangles, so how big they are in terms of scale. So you don't want to zoom out too far, unless you want to delete things. And when I say delete, I meant overwrite. So you can see the angle of the brush, so I'm drawing kind of up and down on the arm as opposed to side to side. And I just want to be careful here I don't muck up the geometry too much. It's very easy to all sorts of nice tools that we have here. So I can put in a mask. So I can, I'll just put the strength up to 100%. So I can draw the mask here. And when I do that, I can no longer affect that area with what I kind of draw on top. So if I go back to my clay strips, I'm not going to affect the area I've already kind of drawn on. So if you have got something that you like and you don't want to risk writing on top of it or sculpting on top of it, you can just use that mask tool. Now, okay, we will undo our mask tool. Where is our mask? There it is. And we will hold down the control key and rub it all out. Okay. And go back to clay strips. And this is a fairly, time-consuming thing to do. So just going to add in an elbow here. So if you're going to make a character like this using this method, where you don't, you're not following a blueprint, or you're not doing kind of traditional polygon editing like we have in other sort of classes, you have to leave aside time A to sculpt, but B to fix things and to experiment. If you're not going to have a completely clear plan about what you're going to do. So I normally avoid starting with the face, because you end up putting in too much detail and focusing on it. Obviously that's probably the area we'll spend most time on, but if we can get the rest of it in some sort of half decent shape, then it'll make working on the face a bit easier. Okay. I still haven't made up my mind if I'm going to have what way I'll do the toes, or if I'll actually put in a foot, or just put on sort of like kind of almost like vertical toes, like some of the stone trolls in Lord of the Rings, or if we'll put something a little more subtle. Okay, so we're starting to get there. Again, we need a nice, large and broad kind of shoulder. Seems to be sort of the nature of what we're making. And we'll see if we can build this up here. Little bit of work on the face. All I want really here at the moment is a blob that has a decent amount of geometry. So as I said earlier, when you're doing this, the resolution is determined by proximity. So I'm just going to go File and Save. And if I do this here, you can see I've lost all that detail. So if I go in really close here, I can get lots of detail. I can also come up here and I can change this number and get, I can make it smaller and get a lot more detail in. And at the moment this isn't, we're on what, 35,000 verts, so a relatively small number of verts. So let's just put in some basic sort of facial detail. at this stage. So I'm going to give him a bit of a bigger chin. So we'll just, oop, I don't know how that got over there. Oh, over here probably. So there's his chin, and I'm going to press F and make my brush a bit smaller. And zoom in, and I'm holding down the control key just to get sort of like a mouth. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to make that, this is not the mouth, but just want to sort of distinguish between sort of the chin and the rest of the face. So the mouth will go in there. Then we will carve back here on the cheek, and this will be sort of the nose area here, so we'll get that back there. And then the eyes will be roughly there. And like I said, I'm not worried about the amount of detail in here at the moment. It's just to approximate how this will look. I've got very little geometry here, so just to give myself a starting point. So most trolls have sort of very flat, or when I say most trolls, like I know them, most sort of traditional trolls that you'll see like in a role-playing book or a kind of traditional sort of films that you'll see have a fairly base, fairly flat sort of nose. Okay. Now we'll give him a big sort of eye line here. And right. Oops. And so normally the, your nose and your eye, let's do that again. So this one should lead into the other. And okay. So then we'll give him some lips to work with. And oops, same here. Okay. So, as I said, just a crude sort of beginnings of, a face and an ear and basic sort of shapes. Give them a bit more volume up here. Okay. So far from beautiful, but just like a starting point in terms of sculpting. Okay. Okay, so we're going to save that there, and we're just going to examine one or two techniques that we're going to use. So I'm just going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to go File, Save, and we're going to have a little, kind of think about how he will eventually look. So at this stage, we really do need to make decisions made. Is he going to have hands, or like what sort of feet he's going to have? So he's definitely going to give him a thumb and maybe 3 fingers. And we're definitely going to give him, I think at this stage, sort of elephant kind of feet. So that's their artistic decisions made, and then we can worry about what we do with him after that, in terms of what he's wearing and how beautiful he looks. Okay, so with those decisions made, let's go and see how we would go about doing that. So we'll go back into Sculpt mode. And this, when you come in and out of Sculpt mode, dynamic topology is still turned on. That used to happen, and we still have our X mirror turned on. I have a snake hook tool here and elastic deform. So I'm going to start with my snake hook and see if I can pull out a thumb of some description. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my go back to the clay strips, and just kind of cutting them back there a little bit, and then here I'm going to bring out, using the same technique, 1 or 2 fingers. Oop, I don't want to do that. So from there, now the nice thing about using this tool, apart from the fact that it mirrors, is that as you bring stuff out, as you bring geometry out, it will create new geometry, because we're using dynamic retopology. So you're not just stretching the existing geometry that's there, which is just as well, because you would end up with a crazy looking thing. So that's not too bad so far. That's definitely not in the right direction. Oh, not the leg. So I can always move this back around, so I'm not too worried. Okay, and we'll bring this guy out here, and that guy out there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to clay strips, and I'm just going to flatten this whole area here. Okay, so we have our large kind of knuckled area between This one's a decent amount of geometry in this before I do anything too radical to it. So it is possible to get this very wrong and end up with something very thin and unmanageable. So you have to be sort of careful doing this, not to be have too big a sweep of a movement. So at the moment what I've got here is fine, but it's lacking a bit of volume, which is why I'm using this tool here to kind of build up sort of the girth, shall we say, or the thickness of the finger. Too bad, not too shabby at all. And then lastly this one here. So you can see this sort of, when it thins out here, if it's too thin, when you draw on one side, it'll actually start to draw almost through the model and draw on the other side, and then, you know, when you try to subtract or add, yeah, you end up with difficulties. So if this is too thick, it's easy to remove unwanted geometry, but if it gets too thin, it can be, as you can see here, it can be quite challenging to add back in. Okay, so again, these are just kind of broad strokes to get ourselves the correct sort of shape. So let's see what we've got. So our mangled twisted hand. Okay, that's not too bad at all. Not beautiful, but not too bad. Now, so just do a tiny bit of work on this thumb, and we'll move back around to so we have something, and let's see if we can do a little bit more. So let's start down on these feet, and so I was saying decision made is to do some sort of kind of elephant feet. So let's have a look at how we might do that. So and first of all, I need a bit more geometry. And then we're gonna do some sculpting. Okay, so going to lower this number now a little bit to say 8. So I want sort of like a nail or kind of a toe to sort of protrude out at the front. So we could nearly go down to our tool here and pull this out a little bit. So okay, so we can have toe 1 and sort of toe number 2. Let's try and demark sort of a line around it. Again, this is just broad strokes to give ourselves a basic shape. Put a larger one over here. And then another toe here. Okay. So again, we'll just give it a tiny sort of definition here to this one to give ourselves a bit more, a little bit clearer what's what. Okay. Probably go to our flatten brush. Where is that? Flatten. There we go. Staring at me. Okay. Okay, so we'll come back and finish them in a bit. Let's go back and have a look at this beautiful face and see what we can do to add a bit more detail to it. So I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller, make sure I'm on clay strips, which I am, and let's see. So I'm going to turn down the strength of this brush a little bit. So let's see what we can do here. to sort of define our jaw a little bit more. So we need to cut this back a little bit. Do a full-on detailed ear because life is short. Reduce a little bit more and get sort of a back here. So now we're going to try and work on just getting a bit of a volume into this kind of lip area so that we can add in sort of like almost like a tusk. And then we will go back to our grab tool here and we'll lift this up. And let's go back to our clay strips. Try and bring this up here. And this is basically going to be our eye socket. Now, the easiest thing to do at this point is when we're working on sort of an eye, and this is a bit too broad. I need to narrow that in a bit. There you go. So I'm going to add in a sphere here. So I'm going to go back to object mode and look from the front and click on my 3D cursor and throw that there and add in a UV sphere, and we'll scale it and rotate it on X by 90 and scale it again. So that's going to be my kind of eyeball, and I'm not going to actually use it terribly. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go Shift D, GX, oops, GX. Why can't I do that? What strange things have I done? I'm in global. Let's, oh, hang on. Let's delete them so I don't have duplicate geometry everywhere. So Shift D, GX, and put that over there. That's just a approximate sort of placeholder, so then I can sculpt around it. So I'm going to select my mesh and then go back into sculpt mode. So again, make sure you're on dynamic topology and you have your X mirror on, and I'm still on my. So I need to build my eye up here. And bring this in over the top of the eye. And build this up here. Okay, so that's not too bad. Okay. Okay, so then it's a matter of how we want to kind of design this guy after. Yeah, so I'll take that in a little bit. So he's got quite the jaw. We may not like that. So one of the nice things is, so at this stage here, like he's not quite, he's on the way. So let's just start using the grab tool and see what we can get to. So this jaw is just ridiculous, but with a relatively small amount of kind of meaningful work, we can have this look not quite so ridiculous and huge as a head. And we can also make this a little bit more kind of three-dimensional. That area there, that probably needs the most work. Okay, So maybe that's a bit too small for the rest of the body. He looks quite fierce. Okay. Okay, so now we just need to sort of kind of develop the rest of the character. So we give him some fleshy bits. He's definitely going to be nice and fat. So all I'm doing here is just using the grab tool to try not to make huge. I'm doing lots of small movements rather than any one large one, because that's not going to work out well for us if we do that. So he's a bit saggy. Gravity has not been kind to our old ogre here. Okay, so now let's see where we can go with all this pushing and pulling. We can actually make him look like a character worth working on. Try and give him some sort of spinal column. Okay, we'll go back to our clay strips. Okay, so okay, so we'll just save that for now, and have a look at some of the options that we have. Now, we haven't done any fingernails, or we've a whole bunch of stuff we haven't done yet. And we're about 200,000 verts, so we've got quite a bit of geometry, but not a huge amount. We still have to go in and do sort of a detail pass. We haven't done that at all yet. And the other thing we want to do is we want to add in textures, like sort of paint on this guy with texture brushes. We haven't done any of that yet. And how far are we in? We are 57 minutes in. So what I might do is I might just stop there and then come back. He's got he's a little ballerina troll. So I might come back and do a detail pass after this. And stop now because we're an hour in, and then we can rig him and animate him after that. So I'm going to stop now because we're an hour in, and then do probably another hour to get him going.